December 7th, 1941. 7:48 in the morning. The first wave breaks over Oahu like a steel typhoon. 353 aircraft, Nakajima B-29s, Aichi D-3 as Mitsubishi A-6 descend through broken clouds above Pearl Harbor. Their engines throb in unison, a mechanical thunder that drowns out the Sunday morning calm. Below, battleships rest at their moorings like sleeping giants, their gray hulls reflecting the early light. The smell of fuel and salt water hangs in the tropical air. Then the first bomb falls. USS Arizona shudders as 1,760 pounds of modified naval artillery shell punches through her deck. 9 seconds later, her forward magazine detonates. The explosion lifts 1,000 men skyward in a column of fire and smoke that towers 400 feet into the Hawaiian sky. The sound, witnesses will later say, was not like thunder or an earthquake, but something older, something that reached into the chest and stopped the heart for a single, terrible moment. In 90 minutes, 18 ships are sunk or damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, 2,403 Americans dead. Commander Mitsuo Fukuda circles above the carnage, transmits the code phrase, Tora, Tora, Tora. Tiger, tiger, tiger. Complete surprise achieved. 6 admirals stand on the bridge of Akagi, flagship of the Kido Butai, as it steams westward away from Hawaiian waters. Vice Admiral Chichi Nagumo commands the strike force. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the operation, waits at Hiroshima Bay for the radio reports. They have studied American strength for years, the industrial capacity, the oil reserves, the population spread across a continent. They understand the mathematics of the gamble. Yamamoto himself warned the government, I can raise havoc with them for 1 year. After that, I can guarantee nothing. But the Imperial General Headquarters demanded action. American embargoes strangled Japanese oil supplies. The choice appeared binary, submit or strike first. They chose the strike, calculated to wound America so deeply that negotiation would become inevitable. 7 aircraft carriers launched 700 warplanes across 2 waves. The planning consumed 11 months. Every detail rehearsed, the flight paths plotted on maps marked with secret intelligence, the torpedo modifications tested in Kagoshima Bay's shallow waters, the bombing altitudes calculated and recalculated. They anticipated American counterattacks, prepared for losses. What they never anticipated was the nature of what they had awakened. The Japanese naval officers who planned Pearl Harbor belonged to a warrior tradition stretching back centuries. Bushido, the way of the warrior, shaped their thinking, their expectations, their understanding of conflict. War was ritual, honor-bound, finite. Victory belonged to the disciplined, the prepared, the spiritually superior. Japan's military academies taught that material wealth-bred softness, that American society, with its jazz music and Hollywood glamour, its emphasis on individual comfort, had lost the capacity for sacrifice. Intelligence reports reinforced these assumptions. American factory workers went on strike for higher wages. American soldiers trained with wooden rifles because production couldn't meet demand. The United States seemed wealthy but undisciplined, powerful but fractured, rich but unwilling to endure suffering. Japanese commanders looked at the Depression-era America of the 1930s and saw decadence, not potential. They saw the isolation, the bitter political divisions, the public reluctance for foreign war. They calculated that a swift, decisive blow would shatter American morale, that a democracy accustomed to comfort would choose peace over prolonged suffering. Pearl Harbor was designed not just to destroy ships, but to break will. What Commander Fukuda saw from his cockpit that December morning seemed to confirm everything. Battleships burning, aircraft smoldering, Americans scrambling in confusion. The strike achieved 93% of its tactical objectives. Japanese losses: 29 aircraft, 9 airmen, 5 midget submarines. The exchange rate appeared devastating, Japanese precision against American unpreparedness. As the carriers turned for home, officers celebrated. They had purchased, they believed, time and negotiating leverage. Admiral Nagumo declined to launch a third wave against Pearl Harbor's fuel depots and repair facilities. The primary targets, the battleships, lay burning. The mission was complete. What none of them understood, what no amount of intelligence gathering could have revealed, was that they had not wounded America. They had unified it. The transformation began within hours. Radio networks interrupted regular programming. President Franklin Roosevelt called congressional leaders to the White House. Across America, factories that had been divided by labor disputes went silent as workers gathered around radios. In Detroit, assembly line workers heard the news and returned to their stations without being asked. In Pittsburgh, steel mill operators began calculating how quickly they could convert peacetime production to war material. In Seattle, Boeing engineers pulled out design specifications for heavy bombers. The Japanese admirals had studied American industrial capacity, the raw numbers, the factory counts, the production statistics. But numbers on paper cannot capture the transformation that occurs when purpose replaces routine, when a nation's industrial might shifts from profit to survival. America in 1941 possessed 31 million workers, 17 million of them in manufacturing. It produced 5 million automobiles per year, more than the rest of the world combined. It generated half the world's electricity, controlled 2/3 of global oil production, mined 1/3 of the world's coal. All of this had been directed toward peacetime consumption, washing machines, radios, refrigerators. On December 7th, the switch flipped. Within 72 hours, Detroit automotive plants received conversion orders. General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, corporations that had been fierce competitors, began sharing patents and production techniques. Assembly lines designed to produce passenger sedans were reconfigured for tanks, aircraft engines, munitions. The transformation was not gradual. It was immediate and total. By the end of December, automobile production for civilian use had ceased entirely. The last civilian car rolled off a Detroit assembly line on February 10, 1942. After that, every plant, every worker, every machine served the war effort. In 1941, American factories produced 3,000 military aircraft. In 1942, they produced 47,000. In 1943, 86,000. The progression was exponential, incomprehensible to military planners accustomed to the constraints of island economies and limited resources. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress emerged from this industrial metamorphosis like something from prophecy. Its development began before Pearl Harbor in 1940, when the Army Air Corps issued specifications for a hemispheric defense weapon, a bomber capable of carrying a significant payload over unprecedented distances. Boeing's design was radical: a pressurized cabin allowing high-altitude flight, remote-controlled gun turrets, a wingspan of 141 feet, for Wright R-3350 engines generating 20 to 100 horsepower. Each the prototype cost $3 million, more than any American aircraft ever built. Critics called it extravagant, unnecessary, a waste of resources. After Pearl Harbor, those criticisms evaporated. Japanese intelligence officers tracked American production reports with growing alarm. The numbers seemed impossible, propaganda designed to intimidate. When reconnaissance aircraft photographed American airfields in 1943, showing rows of heavy bombers extending to the horizon, analysts assumed the images were doctored. No nation could produce aircraft at such rates. The assumption revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of American capacity. Japan's entire wartime aircraft production from 1941 to 1945 totaled 76,000 machines. American production in the same period exceeded 300,000. The disparity was not merely quantitative. It represented different economic philosophies, different relationships between government and industry, different scales of ambition. Japan mobilized an empire. America mobilized a continent. The B-29s began arriving in the Mariana Islands in October 1944. Saipan, Tinian, Guam, islands captured at enormous cost, their airfields bulldozed from volcanic soil by Navy Seabees working around the clock. The construction was itself a statement of intent. Tinian's North Field became the world's busiest airport, its 4 parallel runways accommodating 12,000 support personnel and 500 aircraft. From these bases, B-29s could reach the Japanese home islands. Tokyo lay 1,500 miles to the north, well within the Superfortress's operational range. The strategic situation had reversed entirely. In December 1941, Japanese bombers launched from carriers appeared over American territory. Now American bombers launched from captured islands prepared to appear over Japan. But the scale had changed. Where Japan sent hundreds, America would send thousands. The first mission against Tokyo launched on November 24, 1944. 111 B-29s struck the Nakajima aircraft plant. The raid was a tactical disappointment. Only 48 bombers hit the target area. Cloud cover obscured aiming points. Winds at altitude scattered the formations. But the symbolic impact was profound. For the first time since Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle's token raid in April 1942, American bombers struck the capital. Civilians heard air raid sirens, saw searchlights sweep the sky, felt explosions shake the city. The untouchable homeland was no longer untouchable. The raids intensified through winter. By February 1945, 200 B-29s struck Tokyo in a single mission. By March, 300. The numbers climbed with mechanical inevitability, each raid larger than the last, each demonstrating a capacity that seemed limitless. March 9, 1945. 11:30 at night. 334 B-29 Superfortresses approached Tokyo from the southeast, flying at 7,000 feet, low altitude for heavy bombers, beneath the worst winds, within range of anti-aircraft fire. Each aircraft carries E-46 cluster bombs, incendiaries filled with jellied gasoline. The payload is not designed to destroy factories or military installations. It is designed to burn. Tokyo in 1945 was a city of wood and paper, traditional construction, narrow streets, dense population. 16 million people crowded into districts where residential areas merged into industrial zones, where civilians lived beside munitions plants and military depots. The distinction between military and civilian targets had eroded through 4 years of total war. The first B-29s dropped their incendiaries in an X pattern, marking the boundaries of the target zone. Following bombers fill in the pattern, methodically, relentlessly. Each aircraft releases its payload and banks away, making room for the next. The bombing lasts 3 hours. By midnight, 16 square miles of Tokyo are burning. The fires create their own weather. Superheated air rises in massive columns, drawing in oxygen from the periphery. Winds generated by the thermal differential reach 70 miles per hour, strong enough to uproot trees, to lift adults off their feet, to tear infants from their mother's arms and fling them into the flames. The phenomenon is called a firestorm, the same effect that consumed Hamburg and Dresden, the same physics applied to Japanese urban planning. Water in the canals boils. Metal liquefies. Stone cracks from thermal stress. People suffocate in underground shelters as the fire consumes all available oxygen. Those who flee into the streets are caught by the winds and pushed back into the flames. Those who jump into the rivers find the water's surface covered with burning debris, fuel oil, wood, paper, cloth, all floating, all aflame. The bombing creates a vision of apocalypse. By dawn, 100,000 civilians are dead. 1 million are homeless. The casualty count exceeds both atomic bombings combined. 16 square miles of Tokyo, the historic heart of the city, reduced to ash and skeletal frames. Photographs taken from reconnaissance aircraft the next day show geometric patterns of destruction. The burned area appears as a gray blank on the map, sharply outlined, total. Outside the perimeter, the city continues, houses intact, trees green, life recognizable. Inside, nothing remains but rubble and smoke. The precision is almost abstract, the devastation too complete to comprehend from above. At ground level, survivors wander through landscapes rendered alien. Entire neighborhoods erased. Landmarks gone. Navigation impossible when every street looks the same, when every direction shows the same vista of ash and debris. Bodies lie in formations, families huddled together, workers caught fleeing their factories, school children in orderly rows where their teachers had gathered them. The death is industrial in scale but individual in reality, each casualty a person with name, history, family, dreams now reduced to carbon and bone. The Tokyo firebombing was not an isolated event. It was a template. Over the next 5 months, 67 Japanese cities burned. Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokohama, every urban center with significant industrial capacity became a target. The raids followed a pattern. Initial high-explosive bombs to rupture water mains and tear open roofs, followed by incendiaries to ignite the exposed interiors, followed by more high explosives to hamper firefighting efforts. The tactics were refined with each mission. Bombing altitudes adjusted for maximum accuracy. Flight patterns optimized to overwhelm defensive systems. Target selection calculated to maximize disruption of war production while accepting, the massive civilian casualties that incendiary raids guaranteed. By summer 1945, Japanese air defenses had been degraded to near irrelevance. Fuel shortages grounded most fighter aircraft. Anti-aircraft ammunition grew scarce. B-29s flew daylight missions over Japanese cities without significant opposition, their presence itself a demonstration of complete air superiority. Admiral Yamamoto did not live to see the firebombing campaigns. American cryptographers decoded Japanese naval communications in early 1943, learned that Yamamoto would be inspecting forward bases in the Solomon Islands. Fighter aircraft from Henderson Field intercepted his transport on April 18, 1943, exactly 1 year after Doolittle's raid on Tokyo. The timing was not coincidental. Yamamoto's death deprived Japan of its most capable naval strategist, the one senior officer who had understood from the beginning that war with America was a gamble Japan could not win. His prophecy proved accurate. 1 year of victories: Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Singapore. The men who flew B-29s over Japan in 1945 were not professional warriors. They were conscripts and volunteers from every American state and social class, trained in months, sent to war with abbreviated instruction and high casualty expectations. Yet they flew night after night over defended cities, knowing that anti-aircraft fire could cripple their aircraft, that mechanical failure could force them into the Pacific, that capture meant imprisonment and possible execution. They flew because the mission demanded it, because their crews depended on them, because surrender was not conceivable once the machinery of total war had been set in motion. Their motivation was not abstraction, not democracy or freedom in the rhetorical sense, but the concrete reality of Pearl Harbor, the photographs of burning ships, the casualty lists, the understanding that the nation had been attacked and the attack required response. The response was industrial, systematic, and ultimately overwhelming. After the surrender, occupation forces found Japanese documents analyzing American production capacity. The reports made for grim reading for their authors. Pre-war estimates had been wrong by orders of magnitude. American industrial output had not merely exceeded expectations, it had been systematically underestimated because the analysts could not conceive of factories operating at such intensity, converting so completely to war production, sustaining such output year after year. The errors were not statistical. They were conceptual. Japanese planners understood scarcity, efficiency, maximizing limited resources. They did not understand abundance channeled through unified purpose. They saw American wealth and assumed it bred weakness. Comfortable people, they believed, would not endure sacrifice. The assumption was fatally wrong. Americans were comfortable, but comfort did not equal fragility. It meant reserves of material morale capacity that could be mobilized when necessary. Pearl Harbor made it necessary. In the decades since, historians have debated American strategy, the morality of firebombing, the necessity of atomic weapons, the alternatives that might have ended the war with less destruction. The debates are necessary, important, unresolved. War crimes tribunals after the conflict prosecuted Axis leaders for atrocities, but did not seriously consider Allied bombing campaigns, though the tactics differed little from those condemned when employed by enemies. The distinction turned on victory. Winners judged losers, and the asymmetry of outcomes validated the means. This is neither moral philosophy nor historical analysis, it is simply the reality of how wars end and justice gets administered. But beyond moral debates lies strategic fact: the bombing campaigns worked. They destroyed Japanese industrial capacity, shattered civilian morale, created conditions where surrender became inevitable. They worked because America could sustain them, could produce the bombers, train the crews, deliver the ordnance month after month, year after year, at a pace enemies could not match or counter. The B-29 campaigns were not tactical operations. They were industrial processes applied to war, mass production techniques turned toward destruction, American manufacturing capacity deployed as a weapon itself. The admirals who planned Pearl Harbor believed they were initiating negotiation through violence: strike hard, wound deeply, then offer terms. The strategy assumed equivalence, assumed both sides operated within similar constraints of resources and will. The assumption was wrong. America did not negotiate. It mobilized. It converted its economy into a war machine so vast that by 1945 the question was not whether Japan could win, but only how long Japan could endure losing. The answer came in fires that consumed cities, in blockades that starved millions, in bombs that released atomic fire, in B-29s that appeared over Japan by the hundreds until surrender became the only alternative to annihilation. 700 warplanes struck Pearl Harbor. 12,000 B-29s responded. The disproportion was not accident or rhetoric. It was literal fact, the arithmetic of total war waged by an industrial democracy that chose victory regardless of cost. In the end, what the Japanese admirals failed to understand was that democracies are not weak because they debate. They are resilient because they can unify when threatened, can channel disagreement into common purpose when the stakes become existential. Pearl Harbor provided that threat, made the stakes clear. What followed was not inevitable. Wars are contingent. Outcomes depend on countless decisions and accidents. But given America's industrial capacity, its geographic advantages, its population and resources, the ultimate result was always probable once the nation committed fully to winning. The B-29 symbolizes that commitment, a weapon so advanced, so expensive, so ambitious that only a society with abundant resources and technical expertise could produce it, and could produce it by the thousands. Where Japan built 700 carrier aircraft and struck once, America built 12,000 strategic bombers and struck for 3 years, systematically, until the enemy's capacity to resist collapsed entirely. The sky over Tinian on August 15, 1945, was clear. B-29s that had been loaded for missions to Japan sat on the runways, their ordnance removed, their crews waiting for orders that would now never come. The war was over. For years earlier, Japanese bombers had appeared over Pearl Harbor and changed history in 90 minutes. Now American bombers filled Pacific air bases, waiting to return home, having changed history through 3 years of systematic destruction. The symmetry was not poetic, it was strategic. What began with surprise attack ended with overwhelming force. What began with confidence in swift victory ended with surrender on a battleship anchored in Tokyo Bay, while B-29s flew overhead, silent reminders of the power that had turned cities to ash and forced an empire to submit. 700 warplanes launched the war. 12,000 bombers helped end it. The numbers tell the story, not of morality or justice or the righteousness of cause, but of industrial capacity mobilized for total war, of democracy unified by attack, of abundance transformed into overwhelming force. Pearl Harbor was the beginning. The B-29 campaigns were the answer, comprehensive, devastating, final.